great comment asking me about how to deal with DS problems on the way in, and it sparked a train of thought and a vocal sauce video, which is what we're about to drop. So let's get into it. I did a little research and I realized there's a lot of guys that look at it like similar to how I do on the way in, which is I really try to not use a de-esser on the way in if at all possible. It's not part of my vocal chain. That could be also because of the chain that I prefer to use is a Neve 1073 into a Pultec style EQ into an 1176 compressor. Now, the more people you do research on, like Andrew Sheps, Jacquire King, you're going to find that this chain is always, that's a lot of people's go-to chains. You got a Neve 1073 into an 1176, and Andrew Sheps is quoted in saying on one of these videos I saw, where he's just like, if I have that, I'm not compromising in the least. Now, I like to add the Pultec between the 1073 and the Blue Stripe or any 1176 you have. I like to add it there because, especially on some of the Pultecs, you have more options of where to cut. So what you can wind up doing is using the Neve more for flavor, a little top end boost, little low, high pass filter at 50 hertz, let's say. Maybe you're boosting around 100, the 110 boost, and you're boosting a little in the mid range, maybe 3.2, something like that, and you're boosting some top. But on the Pultec, you could subtract, depending on what Pultec version you have. And even if you have, like I have the Warm Audio, Revive Audio modded Warm EQ that came out a long time ago. But when I first, it always was a great thing to put between a Neve 1073 and a compressor because of what you can pull out of it in a very natural way on the top. So, I could set mine to 3K, 4K, 5K. It has additional options that a lot of those don't have in, if they're modeled after like the original Pultec, you're more limited on the options where you can pull down things. It's like 5, 10, 20 on a lot of them. But this 3K, 5K, 4K, and 10K, and 20K. So those are my options. So I wind up pulling out sometimes some 4K, some 5, or some 3 out of the top. Now, you could also do things like get a very kind of natural low-end boost out of it, or you could boost while you're simultaneously cutting. So it's just another go-to for me that eliminates the need for a de-esser. And then I'm hitting the compressor to pull it all together. Now, Jacquire King talks about his vocal chain, his go-to chain, and it gives you a little bit more insight into somebody who does use a de-esser on the way in. And that's what I found particularly interesting about the way he rolls. Whereas Al Schmidt never uses de-essing on the way in. He'll solve it with the vocal mic. Now, that style is one that I really like because who doesn't love the idea of fix it at the source? We all love that. If you can get a better source sound, you'll do better in the mix every time, more naturally, without using as much stuff. So the way he'll deal with that, he'll turn the mic a little sometimes to eliminate the sound. Now you got to do this based on listening because there's no way that I could predict like what you're doing with the mic to make the sound not, to make the S's so harsh. But my first thought is maybe your room excites those frequencies from around, let's say 3K on up to 10 or 12K. Maybe your room is particularly excited in that area. So you got to dull it down a little bit. You have to do stuff in the room to correct that. Maybe record in a different place. Maybe, get further from the ceiling or put more stuff on the floor. Some version of that might help. But if it's not the room, the reason I say that, right? The room, if it is the problem, it's going to be a problem when you're recording. And then when you're listening back, if you're listening back in the same room you recorded in, if you recorded yourself, it doubles up the problem because the problem didn't leave. It's in the room when you're hearing it, and it's in the room when you're tracking it. So it's double as bad, right? So just recording in a different room could help you a lot if you notice that that's a real big problem. So turning the mic slightly might help, slightly off axis to where the vocalist is. Try positioning it a little further away. Try tipping it downwards a bit. Try lowering it below a little below where the mouth is, try above. I prefer above pointed down a little bit, as I mentioned in my last vocal booth video thing, where I position a mic typically is a little above the mouth, pointed down slightly, I find helps. It never direct hit with it if you can help it. Now, again, everything you gotta try and decide what you like better, but mainly Al Schmidt says, you know, if it's still not working, I change the mic. So if he can't get it right with positioning and tweaking of the mic, he's changing the mic. That's the first thing you should do if you're always upset with the way your vocal sounds. Use a different mic. And here's something I've learned from experience. A dull mic, a mic that sounds more dead, you can do a lot with that in post to make it better. While you're mixing, you could do so much. I had a guy with a vocal that sounded like he accidentally, or maybe not accidentally, recorded into the back of it. So for some reason, the tracks I got sounded so just like absent of a lot of top, where I was cranking using the SSL like all I could on the highs, and sometimes doubling up, like on one EQ, hit it as hard as I could just to bring back some top. And that vocal sounded so good. At the end of that mix, the vocal was great. So I thought to myself, having a dull mic is never really bad because we could add so much top on it. Whereas when you have a mic that hurts you, you spend all your time trying to get rid of the pain while you're mixing. And that's worse, in my opinion. Now, everyone has different opinions on this stuff, but that's my opinion. So let's dive into Jacquire King's style of what he does, because that's going to be helpful, I think, for people to kind of understand a way that somebody else processes vocals who does use some de-essing on the way in. So his chain is a Neve 1073, like I said, 50 hertz high pass filter, boost at 110 by a couple dB, boost at 3.2 by a couple dB, okay, and a little top end boost. Now that's the first step. That goes into an 1176 blue stripe. Our, fan, I just set I don't know what his settings are specifically, but this is a very common way to start, at least for me, is I go 4-to-1, I slam the release as fast as it goes, and I put the attack kind of right in the middle, and I start from there. If I want more transient, I back the attack off. If I want to chomp down, I turn it to the right. All right, now moving off the blue stripe, because everybody knows those two things, like we said, that's the go-to, and this is what he's doing on the way in. The next step in his chain, I have this Fab Filter de-esser on, but what he uses is this thing, the DBX 902 de-esser, which is, as you can see, I mean, $400. It's not that expensive of a de-esser, and this is his go-to de-esser. And what he said is sometimes he'll hit it harder than others depending on the vocalist. So that's the other thing. Is like, I don't have this I hear S's that hurt me a lot, and I'm not absent of that S annoyance, but it doesn't bother me when I'm mixing, mainly because I'm not super focused on it. I could watch certain videos on YouTube, and I could and sometimes, just for example, Rick Beato, one of my favorite creators there is, a lot of times on his videos, the S's bother me. And that's a large symptom of my phone and the way my phone reproduces the S's, not as much of a symptom of the fact that there's too much S's. It depends on what you're focused on. Also, once you latch onto something, like I latched onto that being a problem on some video way back whenever, now it's always a problem for me. It's just because my brain can't let it go. Whether it is or not, that's up for debate. I don't know. It's just always something that comes up in my head when I hear those videos now, because I thought about it once. So you may be fixated on de-essing being your thing, but sometimes you don't need to de-ess. That could be more in your head than in reality, unless it's a problem in your room, in which case you're actually not hearing reality. You're hearing a problem that doesn't exist that you're then trying to fix because your room gives you way too much S. S game is crazy in your room. That's the bottom line. So $400 for his de-esser that he uses after the blue stripe. Now, in our case, let's just look to plug-in form for a second, because I'm a huge fan of what you could do with this de-esser. I've seen this de-esser set so many ways. I'm practically an expert on de-essers at this point from studying how many ways different people use de-essers. And what I could tell you is I've seen this thing used very commonly, and I put up in a video where I described like harshness recently, and like from 6 to 14 is probably the most common I've seen. But I've seen people, I don't remember who it was exactly. I've seen this thing where people just go all the way down to 2K and then take this thing up as high as it goes and just set it to wideband and then just barely like this, it'll still be working. So there's like, this is not a way that I would have ever set this thing until I saw somebody do it who's like, this is how I always use it. And it's like, it's just amazing to me how many different ways you could use a de-esser. So maybe you're not using the de-esser, maybe you got to try some other ways is my point. That video I made showing 6 de-essers, that is used by a very prominent mix engineer where he's putting so many levels of de-essing in there and each one doing a very little bit at different frequency points. That to me makes a lot of sense, but this is another way to look at it, where instead of going split band on several different frequency points, he's doing wideband and just covering kind of the whole spectrum. So now this is not what Jacquire King is doing, but I just wanted to point out that maybe you need to experiment with using your de-esser in more ways than you think, and also getting lower than you think. Sometimes the de-essing can happen as low as 2K, and that's something I noticed, that there's a harshness down there that you sometimes want to tame. So I found that interesting. Wideband all the way. Now let's keep it moving. So what he'll do so those 3 things are on his way in. He will then, when he's in the box, he has the Massenburg EQ, which if you're not familiar, it's this one. Massenburg Design Works. This is the UA version. I think Massenburg makes their own also. It's not a cheap plugin, but he likes it the best, Jacquire King, because it is the best sounding digital EQ, is what his words were. So he's like, it does the least amount of harm, it's extremely transparent, and it just sounds great. So he's using the Massenburg on all his tracks. Like everything gets a Massenburg. And, it does something else. So like the Neve, even though he's got a 50 hertz high pass filter, the Massenburg, he's also filtering around 30 cycles. It's more hardcore of a slope than Neve. And as a result, it cleans up any additional low end that may be being pulled out by the compressor and anything else that's happening along the way. Like after it gets into the computer, he's cleaning it up again. So I find that interesting. And then what he said was, if he wants to use some distortion on the vocals sometimes, he could put Decapitator right on the track. And the reason Decapitator works so well right on the track is because you got the mix knob. Whereas if you were to use something like a Sans amp, you got to run it in parallel because you don't have that ability to blend. So it's more heavy-handed, so you're using it in parallel. Now, just something to keep in mind, when I use parallel distortion, especially on like drums or even parallel compression on drums, it's a Tom Elmhurst thing, and I've heard this by tons of people. You take off top end because the cymbals will come up more, and you don't want that. So what I'll often do is just use parallel compression, like slam it on the skins of drums rather than the cymbals too, so I don't have to deal with it as much. But if you wind up doing it on your rooms or whatever, you got to roll off top end. So I look at that similarly when I think of vocal. If you've got harshness at the top, are you using parallel? If you are, is your distortion or compressor having top rolled off? Because get as aggressive as you need to kind of give you the parallel you want, but not destroy, everything with more harshness on the top. So think along those lines. All right. Now, the next step, what he always said was he uses the Dolby A trick. Now, he'll use this as a hardware insert because he's got the physical, he's got the Dolby A joint. But what we got is, like, if you're going to do this in the box, you could potentially run it in parallel. And what he said was he'll first use some kind of compressor on it, like an LA3A or the TG1, the Chandler TG1. Now, this is a very, like, I believe when he said he actually mentioned in plugin form he used the TG1. This is what I think he was using, because they've got built-in Jacquire King presets on this thing. So if I had to guess, he was using this, and probably, maybe not, turning the rest of the modules kind of off just to get the limiter function that he wanted. But it was either that or he was using the this guy right here, the TG12345, which is, they all have a slightly different flavor to them. And I have a tendency to really like this one. So bottom line is, for this Dolby A trick, you got to do some sort of limiting to squash and get everything closer together so you're reducing dynamic range, then hit it with something like, and you've got options here, but Fresh Air is a free plugin, so that's why I figure I throw it on here to give you some of that top end. And don't note the settings really because it's dependent on your track, but mess with Fresh Air. Satin is another one, Satin. There's so many. The Waves Oral Exciter is one of my favorites. So you may have that one, the Apex Oral Exciter. I love the Apex thing. I use that a lot on bass. Like, that thing is a go-to plugin. Chad Blake uses it on vocals. So that's a great plugin too that a lot of people know how great it is. I mean, I'm a big fan of that plugin. Now, also he's using some pitch parallel. Micro Shift, now I just have it set on the classic setting at the moment, but I often find this is a pretty good starting point. So the Micro Shift is your pitch like an H3000 kind of thing. So maybe you have any other pitch plugin you want to use. What is it? Valhalla has one too that's kind of cool that I like. That's free also. What is that one called? Let's find out. Space Modulator. This colorful guy. Now, this thing's free also, and it's a great plugin to know about and have if you don't have it already. So, moving on, what we have is also, he said, I got 2 reverbs. He said a couple reverbs, a couple delays, always. So, the pitch stuff is in parallel. The reverbs are in parallel. The delays are in parallel. The Dolby A trick, we're running in parallel, but I believe he's just using that as a hardware insert on his vocal track itself. But like I said, if you're using SansAmp, that's going to be in parallel. Try your reverbs out in mono. We don't need to go deeper on that. Get rid of some top and bottom on your reverbs if they don't have the settings on it. And then I just, my go-tos at the moment, I love the Mega Verb. And a lot of times you're in parallel, you got to go 100% wet. Just keep that in mind. Now, Space Rec, this is another one that I'm really exploring and loving. Just amazing what this plugin can do. Delays, I've got Tape Echo here from T-Rax, which this is an old favorite of mine that I have a tendency to just gravitate towards because I love tape echoes, and that one particularly sounds cool. Echo Boy is my other favorite of always. But there's no right or wrong. You use any ones you want. I also really like one of my absolute favorites, the Galaxy Tape Echo. Super cool. The Space Echo. Super cool. I have to give you a little anecdote story here. There was a place I used to record a lot that had a Neumann 47 and a Blue 47. The Blue was substantially darker. So just from switching one 47 to another 47 sounded like a completely different mic and better on some vocalists. So you got to look at your mic first. That's going to be the biggest sound imprint on what you're doing. Absolutely every time, 100%. So if you have other mic choices, don't be stuck the way you are. And if every time you change the mic, you still hear this problem like crazy, it's possible the vocals, maybe you're just a singer that's prone to having more of those problems, or like I said, it's the room that's creating more of those problems for you, and it's doubled up because you're mixing the same room you're recording vocals in. So experiment with that. Try a different spot. And like I said in yesterday's video, if you have treatment up, put it behind you. That's the way the mic is facing. That's what needs the treatment, is the closest wall behind you if you're close to something behind you. Experiment with all this stuff. Whatever you do, don't put your head in a box like I did when I was in college because I thought I was doing something good. I started to sing into a microwave. Don't do that. Talk to you soon. Leave questions, answers, comments in the jam so anybody can, anything I didn't think of. Also, Chaos Dynamics, excellent comment on flipping the mic over. I think I mentioned that in a video a while back when I was in my other studio, but the capsule is absolutely going to be more sensitive to heat, and the older mics tend to heat up a lot. See, my mic, that CM6 never really heats up that much. Even when it's been on for hours and hours and hours, when I touch that thing, it's never really hot, so I don't think about it that much. But when I use the Neumann 47 and that Blue 47, the Neumann would get real hot. And flipping that thing over, because it wasn't like it was a vintage, old mic. When you would flip that thing over, the heat disperses up away from the capsule. So I just wanted to highlight what Chaos Dynamics said there, because absolutely true and extremely helpful to preserving your mic, if nothing else. But also, when you flip it up, remember, tip it a little bit so that the thing is pointing slightly on an angle, so you're not singing directly into it, hitting it with the loudest, plosive you could hit it with. You're not punching it with air. All right. Also, experiment with ribbon mics, man. If you haven't tried a ribbon and you're a guy who has a lot of S's going on, you might have gotta have to. I gotta tell you. Also, if you turn that thing slightly off axis, you can get a lot done. Because I can't tell you for sure because I wasn't there when this guy sent me this vocal that was super dark, but he may have been singing into the back of it. Like, I wasn't there, so I don't know if he knew what the front was, and maybe he sang into the back the whole time, because I can't fathom why it was so dark. Like, I just can't. I might have to go back and look at that session and hear what it sounds like totally with nothing on it. It sounded so dark that guy could have been singing, way off the back of it, but I was able to still make it good. So I'm saying, consider turning it a little bit, just like you would with a guitar amp. If you're pointing the mic directly at the center and it's too harsh, you go slightly off axis with it. Think about your vocal like that. And especially for a ribbon, if you push air at that ribbon, it will sound terrible. So you're going to have to double up. You also might ruin the ribbon. You're going to have to double up on your pop filters. Maybe if you got a couple of those pantyhose pop filter jams, double up and just get more something in front of it. And, make sure you're not singing directly into the ribbon. Turn that thing a little bit. A lot of those mics are in figure 8, and just a little bit of turning, if your room's dead, it might give you a cool sound. Depends on what you're going for here. But if you have such a problem with S's, you got to start experimenting with stuff in this way. Don't try to do it the way everybody else does. You got to do some other things, and maybe you'll come up with something great in the meantime, because the best stuff people ever come up with is usually out of necessity, because what normal people are doing or everybody else ain't working. So you got to come up with something else, and you may hit the jackpot with something cool. So experiment, try stuff, questions, answers, throw it in the comments. I appreciate it. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. More to come. You guys got this. Take it easy.